seminar. So I would appreciate it if you wouldn't mind tagging somebody who might be interested in this. If you're watching this down the road, then by all means, skip forward about 10 minutes or so, and we'll get started. And yeah, it's gonna be fun, guys. If you're around, get on down here. We got lots of good stuff, lots of good door prizes. All the pros here, signing autographs, talking fishing. Guys, we'd love to have you. But yep, I'm gonna put you on hold as you jump on. We'll be getting started here with a crappie seminar in just a second.
Go out and be productive and catch some fish. It's just something good to start with.
All right, Scott, obviously bass fishing is a passion. It's your job. You're very, very good at it. But what does crappie mean to you as a professional angler?
Oh, crappie fishing is a sort of a passion too. I'm more of a October through March crappie fisherman. I like catching them when they're fairly shallow and active. I know that they catch them year round, and I like to eat them. I mean, that's one reason I got into it. I like to have fish fries and have people over, and I think it's probably the best freshwater fish there is to eat. But just like Lee, I grew up bass. I grew up actually bass fishing most of the time, but that time of year in the winter and stuff, when we would do a lot of crappie fishing with my uncle, and it didn't matter if you're 5 years old or you're 50 years old. Everybody likes watching that bobber go down. And that was one thing that we did. We fished with minnows a lot back when I was a kid, and now I'm strictly a jig fisherman, and I think it keeps me in tune in the wintertime. It keeps me in tune with my feel for bass fishing. I use a lot of 4 and 6 pound line, and we catch a lot of bass doing it. But now with the technology of the electronics, you can see the crappie a lot of times, and to make them react to a bait, whether you're throwing a 16th ounce jig head with a bobby garland and a monkey milk on it or something, and they're not biting it at Gunnersville, and they're there and they're not biting it, and you end up changing to a 130 seconds and go to catching them every cast. It's just interesting to see how fish interact, how you can make them bite. You can make them active, and you can make them bite, and it's just it's always a learning thing. I try to learn something every time I go.
All right, anybody got any questions yet? None? Okay. Well, I'll just keep, hey, you know what they say, you can't dazzle them with your knowledge, baffle them with your BS. So we'll make that happen here. Lee, if somebody's going to get started in crappie fishing, what is the best way to get started in crappie fishing other than hiring Lee Pitts Outdoors Guide Service?
Man, that was going to be my plug right there.
I took care of it for you.
That was my end. You know, the biggest thing, you can get into crappie fishing, and you don't have to have the most sensitive rod, the highest gear ratio reel and things like that. It's something that you can do with the whole family and get into it. Somewhat very inexpensive. You know, you can get some more sluggish rods, and there's some heavy, you know, brand names that make your crappie gear, but you don't have to go out and spend a whole lot of money. Stay with the basics. Like I said, there's 3 or 4 different colors that I like if I'm using plastics with my Bobby Garlands, black chartreuse, June bug chartreuse, and of course that monkey milk. You know, it's something that wherever you go, they'll hit a monkey milk, and you can do that either tight lining it or throwing it on a float. And the biggest thing is with this equipment, you know, you can get out with a push button, spinning rod, spinning reel, things like that, and get out and let some kids get used to it. I would start them out with probably, you know, you don't want to start with something real small, but something like maybe a 5 foot, 5.5, 6 foot equipment if they're old enough to throw that, and just let them get used to it. Let them get used to casting. Get out in the front yard like we did when we were kids. Tie something on it, just put a float on it, and go out there and whip a dog with it. Just throw it around the yard.
Scott, what's your best way to get involved?
Yeah, I mean, he touched on us about everything, you know, and like he said, you don't have to spend a ton of money. But, you know, one thing that we did as a kid, and you still do it now, and I've learned a lot now, is catching fish trolling. And that's one way to catch a lot of crappie is trolling in the fall or in the springtime. And it's just a lot of fun, too. It's not a lot of work. You can have the kids can be having a soft drink in their hand. They can be eating chips, whatever, and you're just watching 4 or 5 rods, and it's it's a fun way to get kids in the outdoors and get them into fishing. But, yeah, that's the thing that, you know, another way. But just like he said, tight lining's a big deal. Feeling that thump. I mean, crappie absolutely thump a jig better than most bass, and that's one thing that I'm addicted to is to feel that thump. And you know, whether you're fishing, when you're fishing 4 to 6 foot deep, it's pretty easy. But when you get to fishing 16 to 20, 22 foot deep, and you feel them thump a 16th ounce crappie jig, I mean, like I said, I think that helps me stay in tune with bass fishing as well.
So technology's gone a long way these days. How has crappie fishing, Lee, you're an accomplished bass angler yourself. You fished the Opens. You've won some Alabama Bass Trail team, you know, tournaments here on Neely Henry. You're an Angler of the Year in the Bassmaster Elite Series and have won millions of dollars in your career. How does crappie fishing help you stay tuned in that aspect of your career? Let's start with you, Scott.
Yeah, you know, with the advancements in technology, that's one thing that's really helped. I mean, it's really made a difference in bass fishing for sure. Forward-facing sonar was probably the biggest thing that's come along in a long time. And that's the way that I practiced for bass fishing that got good, getting better with my forward-facing sonar is watching, finding a crappie, actually making a cast to them, watching them react to a bait. You know, being able to see a 1/16 ounce crappie jig at 70 foot out in front of the boat fall into a school of crappie at Weiss Lake, and you bring it right over them. If you get below them, most of the time you wouldn't ever catch them. But if you can keep it above them, the crappie will always come up and get it. If you get a fish right below you looking at a bait, seems like if you keep bringing it up and you ever get him interested, and if he starts coming up, if you stop it and drop it to him, most of the time they won't eat it. But if you keep coming up, you can get him to commit to it, and that's something that's helped me out a lot. Just watching, you know, with the technology and the forward-facing sonar, I use Lowrance Active Target, and they're all good, but I use Lowrance, and being able to watch them react to that bait was one thing that's really helped me.
Lee, I know you use electronics. You don't necessarily haven't gone into the forward-facing stuff yourself yet. How can people apply a little bit? I mean, it's still technology, but how can people apply the existing technology that you use without having to do the forward-facing sonar if that's not something they want to do or can afford to do?
You know, really, with my hummingbirds that I'm using on my side scan and down imaging, and I've got a 360 too on my crappie boat. Just like Scott said, watching these fish and paying attention to how they set up. You know, that's the biggest thing. When used to back in the day, all you used a depth finder for was seeing how deep it was. But now you can look and see bottom contour. You can see also with your side imaging, and then you can watch these fish, especially in the early spring, more or less winter, that late January, February, and March, when these fish are really, really schooled up and they're hanging together. You can literally follow a school of fish. You know what depth they're in. You know, and this with the long line trolling, your speed is a whole lot of whether you're going to catch or not. You know, we see so many guys out there, and it gets congested. We're at Weiss and Neely and some of these other lakes that has a whole lot of traffic. It'll get congested in there, but you'll only have probably 5–10% of the fishermen catching fish. And that's because we're paying attention to where the fish are setting up, what depth, and where in the water column they're setting. And just like you said, you want to get it right above their head. You know, get your speeds right, and you can control that with size of lure, the weight, and also with your speeds. So speed is a very critical thing, and I use my electronics with my hummingbirds to let the fish tell me where they want it. So that's something you really got to pay attention with.
And what he's referring to on, if you guys haven't seen it, if you're new to some of this stuff, and if you are, I'm not trying to be condescending, but you can see your GPS speed on your graphs. So the hummingbirds and his Lowrances, they have internal GPS. You can actually put magnetic GPS pucks to increase the accuracy of all of it. And that's what they're referring to on speed, is that they're seeing it on their actual fish finders.
And another thing, if you're doing that long line trolling, it's a fun way to catch them. If you're trolling and you get into a shallower area or you're going to make a turn, you really have to pay attention because you got to speed up. If you're making a turn, you have to speed the trolling motor up, because I'll set mine on constant and just let it go. When you're fighting a fish, you want your boat to keep going. If you stop when you're fighting a fish, all your other ones are going to get hung. So you just want to keep going, and if you go into a turn, you want to speed up. As you speed up, because you're leaving slack in, and you want to bring those jigs up higher in the water column so you don't stay hung. It's something you really got to pay attention to, is that speed.
All right, one of my favorite things, and I've spent time doing this with you on the water, is, you know, being a bass fisherman myself, flipping is one of the most exciting things out there. I learned how to dock shoot with you at a Jean LaRue conference years ago, and I love doing it. So if someone wants to get into dock shooting, what's the best time of the year to do it, and what's the basic, you know, setup that you need to be able to do so, Lee?
I hope I didn't teach you any bad habits on some of that.
Tons of them.
It's you know, really you're looking at more your October, November, and then again post spawn, the April, May, early June, things like that. And the reason being, these fish are kind of pulling out of the shallows, out of the spawning areas, and they like to set up on some wood cover. And all of our Coosa lakes and lakes all around the country, that the docks give a great shade. It gives a great ambush for bait and the little minnows and stuff to come under and eat off the dock and off the poles. But that's the biggest thing, just knowing what time of year to get to them. The fall and late spring, early summer is some of our key times that we catch them.
How much time do you spend shooting crappie?
That's probably my favorite thing to do, is to shoot for crappie. But I mean, we go to Gonnersville.
He's a great flipper.
We go to Gonnersville and fish out deep a lot, but shooting docks is great, and he touched it perfect. It is that fall when you get in those low 60s in the water temp. I mean, it's October, November. Seems like the winter time it gets really tough shooting docks when it gets really cold. Maybe some on the main river, some of those deeper docks that are 20 foot deep, you do catch some. But another thing that I like to do, one thing that while the fish are spawning, they spawn under a lot of those shallow docks. I'm talking about in 2 to 4 foot, and I like to do that at Logan Martin, Neely Henry. We do it a lot, but that's the only other time. And then, like he said, post spawn is perfect for it. And you know, I use a little bit shorter rod. I like a 5.5 foot rod, 4-pound test line, and I'll go to 6, but I just use that with it, and I'm pretty much stay with a 1/16 ounce jig, and I love shooting docks. It's pretty much an easy technique, something that you can teach just about anyone.
It is a blast. there's something about seeing and it use the high vis line, that yellow line. You watch it fall. What's the biggest bass you've caught while you're shooting docks for crappie?
I haven't. I mean, I've caught some 10-pound or better, probably 12-pound catfish. Catch a lot of catfish, and have had a lot of them break me off. But bass, I don't. I mean, I've only caught some. We'll catch some 3.5, maybe a 4-pounder, maybe, but 3.5 pound, and catch a lot. I mean, there's days I sort of know when the bass are moving to the docks because there's times that we'll catch 10 or 15 bass, that in from 1.5 pounds to 3 pounds, and then mostly spots, but we catch a lot of bass doing it.
Lee, have you ever tangled with a big one on that little whippy rod?
Well, it's like you said, in hours when those spots really try to get up in there, more that October, November, when they get up on some of the gravel banks, that's got some 4 or 6 foot poles on them, and pretty quick when you see that line jump and you sit back and that reel goes just screaming, you ain't got no crappie. So those big spots will give you all you want, that light line underneath those docks.
So I know crappie fishing's a lot of fun, and we're all sportsmen. We like to compete. We like, he was a college football player. He played sports. He played football. I was a college baseball player. I love the competition of fishing, but ultimately, when you're crappie fishing, your favorite thing is to go eat them afterwards. So
Yeah.
What is your and this guy is a cooker. I'm gonna tell you that right now. I know Lee likes to burn some stuff too, but this guy, he entertains. He cooks. What's your favorite recipe for crappie fry?
Oh, goodness. We do it a lot of different ways. I like them blackened. I like them grilled, but the best way to do it is to fry them. Peanut oil, about 350, but 370. But I actually had a big fish fry last night. I've tried a little bit of everything. I mean, keep the fillets really cold, dry, go into your batter. I make my own batter. I mean, it's yellow cornmeal. I put some seasoned salt in it. Cavenders, I mix a little Cavenders in. I go 4-to-1 meal over flour and add a little salt, seasoned salt, Cavenders. I think that's pretty much it. But we've done a lot of things like Sprite, soak it in Sprite for about 15 or 20 minutes. That citric acid gives it a little bit better flavor. A little lemon juice in it when you're soaking it, and then dry it off as long as it's super cold and go straight to the batter, straight into the hot grease.
All right, how do you like to cook them?
Well, you can look at me. I'll eat them about any way you cook them, but fried, that's the way to go. You got to fry them. And like you said with that Sprite, I do that too, and I'll put them in a Ziploc with a little water and Sprite in it, and also I put just a drop of Dale's, just a little bit to kind of bring some of that out, and just like I said, I like that Tony Chachere's, or I guess that's how you say it.
Chachere's.
Okay, yeah. I don't have a lot of Cajun in mine, but I like it spicy. Put a little spice to it, a little kick. Like to have a plate with different dippings in there, a little horseradish on it. But around my house, it doesn't get to the plate too often. When you're taking it out of the grease, there's somebody grabbing it and getting gone with it. That's the best way. Get it and run.
If it goes to the plate, I use ketchup, but that's the best way.
All right, so we talked about the main course. Sides. What goes with your crappie?
Hush puppies. And last night we cut up potatoes and made fresh fries, but hush puppies, that's number one. I mean, I use an egg in the hush puppies, just cornmeal mix, diced jalapenos, sweet corn, and Dixie usually mixes it up for me. But getting it the right consistency, I like them pretty small and crispy, and then some fresh potatoes. Sometimes we'll do some Canterbury beans, just if we're really having a deal. But hush puppies and fries is a number one thing.
Are those anything like the skeeter beans that are outside?
I haven't had them. It may be close.
You got to.
I'll go try them.
You ever get an invite to Shea Canterbury? You got to go. What about you? What's your favorite side?
Pretty much hush puppies and coleslaw. Every now and then, like I said, we'll fry some sliced dill pickles. Just have a little something to pick on while you're waiting for the next batch to get ready. So
apparently, I need to get an invite to Shea Pitts too.
I'll tell you, I didn't do it last night, but I'll tell you another thing you need to try with those. You do the pickles. We've done that a bunch too. Get you some banana pepper rings and jalapenos, and just throw them in your fish fry batter and fry them all up and put them in the fish. It's really good too.
Say that again.
Some banana pepper rings and jalapeno rings.
Those
Dip them in your flour, your same batter you're using for your fish, and drop them in the fryer.
Okay.
It sounds like today's not a good day to start a diet after we're
No.
talking about this. Yeah.
I'm hungry right now. I'm leaving. Other tips. What's the biggest mistake you see people make when they're getting started fishing crappie, whether they're guiding in your boat or whether they're getting started on their own?
I'll go first because I don't have a bunch, but too big a line is probably the number one thing I see people do, and too heavy a jig heads. I see people wanting a real heavy jig head where they can throw it a long ways or whatever. I mean, if I had to buy one, it would be a 1/16. I got 32nds, 24th, 16ths, and 8ths, and the only time I'll go to an 8ths, I'm fishing a grub with a paddle tail swim bait, throwing it at schools. Everything else is a lot lighter. 4-pound to 6-pound line, no bigger.
Yeah, and that's something, rarely I'll use an 8th on that. But I have so many people, they'll get in the boat with me and we'll start out and start on our long line trolling or whatever we're doing. And especially some youngsters or some ladies, they say, well, Lee, I don't fish. I've never fished before. I'm a little nervous. I said, no, you'll do great because you don't have any bad habits we're going to break. So you'll do what I say. You get some of these guys and what they want to do, like you said, either they'll bring some equipment, too stiff of a pole, heavy line, and want to put a string of different size baits in one. Just kind of keep it simple. I like 24ths on that too. If I do use 16ths, a lot of time to get down a little deeper, what I may do is double them. Have them about 1.5 feet apart, throwing double 16ths, or either put a piece of split shot above them, because I try to stay away from those 8s too as much as I can.
Anybody got any questions yet? Yes, sir. He wanted to know what time the fish fries this evening. Trust me, I'm working these guys today. They're not cooking anything. They're going to hit a drive-thru on the way home. Yes, sir. So what he's asking is, if you're fishing from the bank, he said he's the world's worst crappie fisherman. I don't believe him. But if you're fishing from the bank, what's the best way to present the lure, whether it's smooth or giving it a lot of action?
Personally, if I was fishing from shore, I would use a bobber. I would use a bobber and put it, 18 inches down below it, especially in the springtime when fish are shallow, maybe 2 foot or so. But if I was from the shore, that's what I would do.
Same here.
Buy a boat.
Why did we know Tony Lumpkin was going to say that? You never have to fish from shore again if you come see our sales staff here at Bucks Island.
And that's the same thing. Throwing a float is probably the best way, and that way you can kind of search a little bit. You can slow it down. If you do know there's some structure out there or put some structure out, try to fish over that structure. And what I like to do, if you're sitting, use that dock or bank or whatever, just if it's a platform, and just fan cast around, because a lot of times these fish will be holding on something, so you may be missing them 10 feet. And so if you kind of widen your cast up a little bit and check different areas instead of the exact same cast, you may stumble up on something and there'll be a whole wad of fish there. Just kind of bobble it. I like to look at it like whenever you pull that float, the bait's going to come up, so you've got it on a pendulum.
You got to stop.
Yeah, bump it up a little bit, pull it maybe a foot, quivering it, stop it. It'll let that bait fall back underneath it straight and shake it, and then you can just start the process again.
And if you heard what Scott said earlier, even with bass fishing, a lot of times, when the lure's above them, they're more likely to come up to it than they are to go down. There's times that fish are going to be on the bottom. But as Scott said, the majority of the year, if they happen to go up to get it, they're more likely to strike.
That's why God put eyes on top of their head.
Yes, ma'am. Her question was, what is your go-to color for crappie bait?
I like to keep it real simple. Black chartreuse, blue chartreuse, anything with chartreuse. But I do with water clarity sometime. I may go to and I'm talking with the garland colors, a blue ice. Maybe if it's cold water and it's very clear, I'll go to that monkey milk or something that is a little more where it's just not overpowering with them. I like for them to try to chase it and try to run it down a little bit.
I'm the exact same way. Black blue chartreuse with a curly tail, black blue chartreuse. Bobby Garland is either monkey milk or blue ice. Like you say, I like Patriot if it's sunny. Just anything to mimic a minnow. If you have dirty water, I like something with some action on it, and I'll go with like an acid rain or a John Deere green, which both have yellow and a chartreuse tail. So.
Okay, I'm going to add a little twist to this question. It's a great question. There's standard, you can throw a natural jig head, but sometimes you can throw some color by putting a different, chartreuse, orange, pink, blue. When do you make a decision on what head color to try?
Me personally, I use mainly lead heads, mainly. If it's a colored head, I like pink more than any of the other colors. I don't know why, but I do. And I do a lot of crappie fishing at night, and we do a lot of that, and that's the only time, going back to color, I use a pink head, and it's a Bobby Garland, but it's Cajun Cricket. It has an orange and green a lot in it. It's a little more color, but it's at night times when I use that.
What about you?
Yeah, it's the same with me. People laugh at me out there on the boat sometime. I've got pink heads on there, and then they're like, okay, what's the joke? With our water clarity, and I can tell it a lot because when I'm long lining, I may have 9, 10, 12 rods out at a time, depending on how many people I get. So when I go through a school of fish, I can kind of figure out real quick what they're wanting and how they're wanting it. If I go through there and one rod keeps getting bit, then I'm gonna see what's on it, change everything around. But I've noticed it sometimes when they really, really get finicky, you may have the exact same bait on and a yellow head on one bait and a pink head on the other bait, or either an orange, and the head makes so much difference. That'll be the only bait getting bit. So play with it a little bit, and you can swap it around, and then when you finally get dialed in, you go through a school of fish, and every rod in the boat goes down, you got to figure it out.
So, and you can add to that by, if you are bank fishing, have everybody throwing something a little bit different color-wise until you figure it out. If you are bank fishing, that way if there's two of you fishing, then got different things on. Don't just both start with the same one, because every day is going to be a little bit different. Yeah.
Question from the internet. What speed do you start out when you're trolling for crappie?
Okay, question from the internet, probably is visible on the screen. I'm going to say it anyway. What speed do you start out when you're trolling?
Right under a mile an hour. Usually I'm at 0.7, 0.8, depending on depth, and then I can go from there. If I see them, they're laying on the bottom, and a lot of times the fish, it'll be the same batch of fish that that are there. They may start out a foot off the bottom, and you're in 18, 20 foot of water. And as the sun gets up and the day progresses, maybe a little wind gets up, or just whatever changes, and the fish come up in the water column, I may pick my speeds up a little bit. But usually I like that. That's something good to start with, 0.7, 0.8.
I'm 100% with him. I'm not as big a troller as he is, but I'm a 0.8 to 1.2 is about as fast as I'll ever go. And that's something you really have to watch because most time we're trolling in a specific area, and you'll make circles or you'll go down and turn and come back. You have to watch it if you got wind blowing one way, because you'll end up having to adjust your trolling motor. The wind gets behind you, it's going to speed you up a lot more, and you'll end up having to dial it way down, and when you're facing into it. So you just have to really pay attention to that speed.
And like you said, with that speed and with the wind too, a lot of times I'll have to turn my trolling motor backwards to slow myself down, because you can tell you'll only catch them one way, because you got that speed right, and then if you go with the wind, it pushes you too fast, you're too far above them. So that speed really has a lot to do with it.
Well, and I'll just be the next one to give you a little sales pitch. We've got the power pole move in there. It has a reverse on the trolling motor, so if you want to save yourself turning and you just want to hit a button, you can do that. I'm playing with you guys, but we do have that. All right, you're rolling into a pocket, crappie been decent, you see a dock that just makes you go, ugh, what does it look like?
A dark shade under it. That's the biggest thing. I mean, to me, it doesn't matter if it's a floating dock or a pole dock, either way. And I've done seminars on bass fishing. It's probably more about bottom composition, or if there's structure under it, than anything. Bottom composition has a lot to do with how hard the bottom is, soft the bottom is, but the darker the shade under it seems to be the better for crappie for me.
Lee, what about you?
Well, I don't want to incriminate myself, but I like the trashiest one you can find out there. I want something that nobody's been on for a while, got boards hanging down in it, Once again, the bottom contour has a whole lot to do with it, whether it's close to a creek swing or something like that, coming in, a little bit of depth out in front of it. That way it lets these fish roll up in it when they want to feed and get out of the sunlight. And then if something happens, they can get right back down to that deeper water and have a little comfort.
So what he's saying is he likes to fish his own dock.
You don't want to walk on mine.
Okay, we got about 5 minutes before we end up the crappie. Somebody have a question over here? Okay. Yes, sir. When the question from the attendees is, when you're shooting docks, do you hold the head or do you hold the hook?
Well, I'll go ahead and tell you. If you grab a hold of that head, because I see them do it all the time, take some Band-Aids with you, because that business point of it's still back behind your fingers. I like to grab it in the bend of the hook. That way, and it's human nature as a fisherman, you want to try to get just a little harder pull to get just a little further, or all of a sudden you miss one and trying to get back in there real quick. If you grab it by the head or by the body, you're going to dig it out of your finger. So I like that bend of the hook.
That's right. I use the bend of the hook as well. I will grab by the head if you pay 100% attention though. You don't want the hook facing backwards. I'll turn the hook completely sideways, so it's shooting it at an angle, and I'll do that a lot. And you're wanting to, when you're shooting docks, you're wanting to keep it super low. I want my rod bent down. I have to get my dad to do his sideways because he'll shoot it up in the air. But if you go down, and I want mine to the release point to go straight as low to the water as I can be, and it'll skip. I mean, it'll skip across the top of the water back into a place.
Lee, there's another product that Bobby Garland makes. Do you ever use that pull tab dock shooter?
I do, and not just for that, and I keep them in the boat with me. If you put that pull tab on there, it kind of eases some of my clients that are just getting into this dock shooting, but also that pull tab on so many of the tabs, they've got a little reflection on there. So coming out of the shadow and hitting that sunlight, it's like killing a spinnerbait when you come off a log or something. It puts a flutter and some flash on it. It also helps with that too.
And by the way, if you guys ever wanted to try it for bass fishing, Bobby Garland makes bass-sized dock shooting stuff too.
Really? Bass
yes,
shooter.
they do. It's called the bass shooter.
Or you could just learn how to flip.
Can't quite get as far back. All right. Any other questions before we end this for the morning session? We're supposed to have a couple little crappie raffle prizes here. I don't see them right now. We'll have to take a look with Colin and Jamie if somebody can run up there, because we're going to do a little bit of a raffle here, and we'll figure that out. But any other questions before we wrap this up?
Oh, yeah.
I'm definitely worse than that guy there. 20 years ago, I decided I'd bass fish my entire life. 20 years ago, I'm going to catch some crappie. I never know, and I started with the bobber and the minnow. And the guy would be with me, which he was better at it. He'd say, you already had your bite. Never knew how to mean.
So, what
100%. I can tell the second, 90% of the time I can tell the second the bite is whether it was a crappie or not. Even if I miss him, I can tell if it was a crappie by the thump. Like a bass, a lot of times they'll thump it, but a lot of the bass that we catch, you'll be fishing and he'll just load up because he's going to suck it in without any problem. But those crappie, actually, it's a great feeling. That thump for crappie is unbelievable. I'm addicted to it.
They professionals. They know how to do it.
Yeah, they know how to eat. I will say this too. I learned fishing out in the West Coast to pay attention to the line. I was fishing with a friend of mine, similar story, where we're shaking worms out there. You do this thing called doodling, and you got a brass sinker and a glass bead, and you're shaking it on the bottom, and I'm sitting there shaking it, and my buddy's standing there. He happened to be between casts, and he was looking at me, and he said, "You just missed a bite." And I said, "What?" "No, I didn't. He said, "Yeah, you did. The circle around your line went whoop," and I wasn't paying attention to it. It just opened.
Sort of like that. I actually finished 15th or something at Table Rock in a FLW bass tournament. Won $12,000 throwing a floating fly. First time I'd ever done it, and we were there, and the water was in the low 40s, and I was fishing a floating fly. which is basically a crappie jig, just a little bit bigger, under a bobber for bass in a tournament. And a lot of those bites, I'm fishing 10 foot deep with a pear-shaped bobber, and when you land, the bobber lands like this. 16th ounce crappie jig gets 10 feet below it, it'll stand that bobber up. You'd twitch it towards you a little bit, and then your bobber would stand up as your jig gets below it. Half the bites I got, when you get at the right depth, half the bites you get, your bobber will just lay on its side. Never twitch, and that's when you got to get into him and catch the fish. So paying attention to all the little subtleties.
Is that because when they bit it, it
Come up.
takes, it
He
comes
came
up?
up. Instead of pulling down, a lot of times they'll come up.
Takes the pressure off.
That's why there's bobbers out there that they're so sensitive and they're balanced that they float in a certain way that when any pressure comes off the water, it lays them over, and that's another indicator of a strike.
That's one of the things too in the fall when we're more vertical approach, out there maybe 18, 20 foot of water on some of these brush piles. Yeah, I call it getting in the rhythm. You'll have those longer rods out, and I still use 8, 10 foot rods doing that. But you'll have a natural little bow in that rod tip, and you can feel by the waves and the wind, and all of a sudden I'll tap them on the shoulder. I said, "You middle ones, you got one." The pressure will come off of it. It won't be a bite like you would think it would, or it may just be a vibration on that rod tip. But if you'll watch them, when you have, usually I got 3 rods to each side. One of them, it'll lose its bend. He's got it. He just grabbed a hold of it, so it's time to snatch it.
The same thing with trolling. You'll see that little bite every once in a while, and that crappie, it might be a 1.5 pound crappie or something, and they'll swim with the boat a lot of times, and you won't ever see it you may go 20 foot before you realize it if you're not paying attention.
Mm-hmm. Just like you got him on a leash,
Yeah,
you just
right.
pulled
They
him
just
down,
kept
pulled him
swimming.
down the water.
So, Scott, we had one final Facebook question specifically for you. Came in from Facebook. Have you ever dropped clay dyer on his head?
No, I didn't drop him. I fell on my back, and he did hit his head. But yes, 100%. That's my other brother, Clay Dyer.
Clay's an amazing human being. We all love him to pieces. Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. We're working on the raffle prizes for the crappie. If they're not down here within the next couple of minutes, what I'll do is we'll include those into our raffle after our seminar A. Guys, thank you so much. I appreciate everything. You're true professionals. A lot of fun. Crappie is a blast, guys. Get into it. You'll enjoy it.
Thank you.
All right, guys. All right, we are wrapping up with a crappie. We're going to jump off. Hey, Kim, seriously, y'all drive safe. We'll be back on here in just about 15 or 20 minutes with our panel, our first group of elite and MLF guys, bass fishing the rest of the day. So 12 and then 2 o'clock will be our last one. So, again, if you're in the area, please come on by. Kim, Clay, really wish you could be here, but always fun to have y'all around. So, all right, I'm going to jump off, and we'll catch you in just a little bit. David, I appreciate all the questions. Just so you know, we got about 40, 50 folks sitting in here. They're trying to get questions in as well, so we're going to do the best we can to get everything answered. But